In this context of ever-changing and challenging times, all our members are eagerly waiting to hear some meaningful deliberations from our eminent panelists. Therefore, without any further ado, may I request the day's proceedings to please follow. And I wish you all a great learning experience at today's conclave. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Nandita Lakshmanan, founder and CEO, The Practice. Welcome, Nandita. And Nandita would be in conversation with Roma Balwani, Director, Communications and Brand, Vedanta Group. Roma is the recipient of several global awards and accolades, and she is the first Indian in-house communicator to be recognized by Holmes Report. She supports disability sports and serves on the advisory board of the Deaf Cricket Society. Welcome, Ms. Roma Balwani. I would now leave it to Nandita to take the session forward. You're on mute, Nandita.
I was hoping I could avoid that statement. but well, thank you, Sujoy, for that introduction. It's great to be here, and it's just wonderful listening to all the previous conversations. It's a beautiful sunny afternoon in Bangalore, and I'm delighted to be in conversation with Roma. We touched base this morning, and I was saying it's been so long since I last met her. So great to be here with you, Roma.
Thank you.
You know, I think we're all living in times of change, and that's now quite a cliche. And the change that we're seeing today and going forward is really going to be an uncomfortable one. From a macro perspective, you're seeing global economies under strain, you're seeing communities that are polarized, and there's an erosion of trust with governments, businesses, and media across the world. So if there's one thing that business and institutional leaders have realized, it is that in times of acute crisis, continuous and direct dialogues with stakeholders is important. And underpinning these dialogues and engagement is clarity of purpose and its articulation, a deep sense of integrity, and unwavering dependability, all of which lead to credibility. So, you know, just going to kind of jump straight into my conversation. And, you know, as public relations professionals, Roma, we've spoken about clarity, credibility, authenticity way before the pandemic hit us. Do you feel that these words have now reached the boardroom and we will now see its integration into the way businesses are run and decisions are made? Or will they continue to remain in the domain of communicator? And I want you to wear the hats that you normally do, you know, the important ones being that of an independent director on boards of companies, as well as the role that you're playing in Vedanta.
So thank you, Nandita, and thank you, ICC, for this wonderful platform. I just got to hear a few words of information overload before I joined in, and seeing that information overload is something that we've been also grappling with. And as you mentioned, that in today's post-pandemic times that we are living in, information overload, I think, was required. I think it was required at a time when we were going through the pandemic. And even at the board level, I remember when we were having our quarter meetings and the board meetings, the whole conversation shifted. And from the conversation on, let's say, financial numbers, from business continuity, risk, governance, all that really came to a fear of the unknown. And the fear of the unknown also translated to the board grappling with the new normal. So when you see something like this, which is so unforeseen, and one doesn't know how the world is going to be, dealing with it, I think these conversations also started playing out at the board level. The board started looking at their business differently. The board started looking at communicating differently. And I can tell you some of the board members were possibly even uncomfortable with the new virtual world. You know, that is something they had to deal with. And for people like us who come from, luckily, from technology backgrounds and in an organization where telepresence is the way of life for us, communications was not hampered, And at Vedanta, being in a essential services category, we had to really fast forward our communication, and many things happened differently. If I go back to the board had to really, to add to the fact that you said that credibility, we had to bring in, let's say, calmness, we had to bring in confidence. I think these are two new things that I learned during that time, because these two then became important to build the trust. The calmness that you give as an organization, and you start making them feel comfortable in a situation which they have never ever faced before. That calmness of leadership really matters most in such times. So that's what we demonstrated. Uh, the way we did it in terms of creating that credibility was to build the confidence. I think to rebuild that confidence was something that's what we did, is to reset and push that button, which was very important. And for people who were not very comfortable, to bring in that comfort. So I think calmness,
That's
creating this whole confidence and bringing in that comfort, which actually led me to believe that compassionate communication was the order of the day. And I think this is what we did. And those conversations started leading up to very different ways of approaching business, if I've
That's
answered your
interesting.
question.
Yeah, it's actually it's really interesting that you bring in the whole aspect of temperament into
Yes.
the calmness, the confidence, and I think all of this is so important if you need to kind of render clarity to your stakeholders, right?
Yes.
And I just also when we say clarity and credibility in, say, the public relations context, right, it's all aimed at the stakeholder, or as we heard in one of the previous discussions, the target audience, and never before have we, and even leaders at the very top, have had to engage with stakeholders the way we had to during the lockdown, and even now, right? So organizations and institutions have to realize that stakeholders will demand more engagement. They want more dialogue. They want a seat at the table leading to effective decision making. On the PR advisory side, Roma, we saw a surge in, taking communication upstream, in terms of the content development, in terms of communicating with employees, crisis management, holding, the hands and leading business leaders to stakeholder engagement, analyst relations, research and analytics, kind of deepening the kind of insights we could bring to the table. So companies were definitely communicating a lot more with their stakeholders directly. And I will say that the strength of public relations as a discipline really surfaces during troubled times, because downstream communication is not enough. So what were your lessons, Roma, that you're going to take with you as you've led a global B2B company, with employees, government, customers, partners, and getting direct communication with all of them? And where did you see most of your time go?
Nandita, I think we all became professionals with no timelines. We were, as you rightly said, being a global organization, you're beyond timelines. And this was a time which was a critical time for you to show your mettle, and to show how communications can be effective. And as you rightly said, credible, but we did it with compassion. I think that was the lesson I learned during the time of communicating with all my stakeholders, as you rightly put it. So who are my stakeholders? That was one definition which everybody must be very clear about. We call ourselves either a business, to a customer, or we call ourselves to a business. But for me, we were business to everyone. So we were not B2C or we were not B2B, but we were B2E. And when you're B2E, your stakeholder universe is so vast, and you don't even know at sometimes the secondary stakeholder who gets impacted by whatever you say, whatever you do, the actions you take. So I think that responsibility comes to the fore, and you have to address that and create that agility of communication. I think we did that very effectively. we were very fortunate that our entire campaign of Desh Ki Zaruraton Ke Liye at Vedanta played a key role, because that brought in the calmness, that brought in the focus. The focus was to make sure that we create a self-reliant India, and we didn't wait for the pandemic to really share that insight. We did that just before the pandemic, and luckily for us, that held us in good stead. And for Vedanta to be seen as a trusted brand with all your stakeholders, and the biggest stakeholder is your government, because you're in the natural resources space. The government has to see you working with the communities, working with them hand in hand, which is what we did. Our entire focus in terms of our reaching out to the stakeholders, which are communities, districts, people, our own employees, we had to look at every aspect in a 360-degree way. We had to look at their mental health. We had to look at employees feeling confident that they retain their jobs. Their families, how do they get reassured? What are the elements of safety and safeguards that we put in place? So all that really required a lot of agility and compassion in communication. I think that's where we scored. And creating that brand connect, which had happened earlier, really held us in good stead. So I think this is very important, that you're very agile. You must leverage your technology, because we created almost overnight. I was so surprised by my IT team. I said, look, I need to know how many people are really being impacted by COVID. What are our stakeholders talking about us? We had a dashboard created almost overnight, which was giving the leadership insights on how to communicate, because you know what is happening on the ground, and that's how you communicate right. So I think these are things which have changed our mindset, made us look at things differently, made us communicate differently, and also wear many hats. You become not only a business advisor, you become a confidant, you become a person whom everybody feels you're the go-to person. So that is something which is a responsibility that you undertake beyond what is known as crisis. I think this was beyond crisis. I probably won't have a word to call it, but I think it's far beyond what I experienced during this time. But I think I depended a lot on my processes. I depended a lot on my uh, the creative process that I'd put in place in terms of my digital strategy, in terms of my communication. I went back to basics. For sure, I went back to basics, because I had to reset. I had to reset every communication that I may have planned, and had to, look at the new normal and see how do I communicate differently. But I must say the leadership and the teams were very agile, and they did help me bring that to the fore. And as an organization, I think at Vedanta, we have proved ourselves. We have proved ourselves that we have been partners in the whole Atmanirbhar Bharat positioning, that the theme that the government gave, almost like a rallying cry. And I think we partnered that very well. Our whole brand campaign is on Desh Ki Zaruraton Ke Liye and Atmanirbhar Bharat Ke Liye. And we are as a organization which gives the impetus to the economy, which is why we had to take care of our employees, because our production never stopped. From 100%, it went down to 10%. But from 10%, we had to go up 20%, 30%, 50%. And today we are almost at 100%. There was never, nothing stopped us. Everything had to continue, but had to continue in a way that we communicate it in the most effective way that gives the confidence, as you rightly put it, that the confidence is important, the credibility is important, but we did it with a lot of calmness and with a lot of compassion.
No, it's I so more power to you, Roma. I think it does seem that your function, the discipline that you lead, actually took the company down a path, to kind of see it to where it is today. And interestingly, you spoke about this campaign that you had launched. It does seem that um, a lot of I think this was also a test of the true mettle of businesses, right? who, there are many institutions and businesses that came into the pandemic wounded, and perhaps, it was, it was just, there was no way but downhill for them. But there are companies who've actually, gone and who've always thought about all these aspects and lived them. And therefore, as they kind of were hit by the pandemic, also have survived because they were much stronger as they came into it. The other interesting thing I thought what you said was, the cushioning around clarity and credibility. You spoke about how you depended on processes. You said you depended on, I mean, I love the concept of, companies, B2E, though I think it's going to be a nightmare, kind of prioritize the stakeholders and communicate with them. But, at this point in time, to have taken everyone into your fold and ensure that, you need to communicate with clarity, and also the fact that you use technology so effectively to amplify those messages and also to kind of glean insights, I think is all kind of very interesting. Now, you spoke about Roma compassionate, being compassionate, etc. And I think we're hearing a lot of buzzwords, right? You're ranging from purpose to ESG. It's everywhere. And, going forward, though, I think it'll all be about walking the talk, because focus on environment, society, governance, they're all going to be so important, and besides, companies have to genuinely exhibit purpose. So what is the role of communicators? You already touched upon that, but you spoke about, compassion, with things with compassion. Is there an inherent clash with the way decisions are made and businesses are run and objectives of businesses are laid out? Is there an inherent clash there?
No, I don't think there is a clash in the way businesses are run. They just have to understand that now businesses will have different requirements to run efficiently. And what were those different requirements? They had to show their leadership mettle, that what should be in their process number 1, 2, 3. Earlier it was your business has to be competitive, your business has to be successful, your business should have financial returns. How did you reset that whole business proposition is what I really liked about this organization. There was just one small statement that our chairman, Mr. Anil Agarwal, made. He says, can we just for a moment set aside business and try to address what this pandemic is going to really impact? And then everybody started, coming out with their feelings, their emotions, their worries, everything just started bubbling out. And that is when it kind of decluttered the mind. It brought in, as I said, that calmness. And then we started instilling the confidence to the organization and the people. And then we realized, when I said business to everyone, the stakeholders that I was so used to addressing, I started addressing 2 different stakeholders. You remember during the COVID time, there were migrant workers who really, there was an exodus. They just didn't know where to go, or maybe the government tried their best, but they couldn't really handle what really happened. So for us, suddenly we saw that is also our stakeholder. How do we take care of them? There were many people who came from Bihar, and for my chairman, it was an emotional moment that he hails from Bihar. And he said, look at the plight. So this stakeholder suddenly became very important for us. And we started looking at them differently. How do we help them? How do we make sure they reach their homes carefully? Is there some way we can rehabilitate them? And that is an ongoing process we have started then. So we are doing something different. That's one kind of a stakeholder. The other kind of a stakeholder who can't speak to us are the animals. I mean, the animals didn't have even an opportunity to eat. Where do they get the food from? So our entire COVID initiatives of managing impact suddenly opened up to 2 different stakeholders that we felt compassion about. Okay, so these are learnings during COVID time, which now you want to take it to the next level, that when you realize the plight and what has happened, communication takes a very different role. Now, if you ask me today, we are evaluating a proper animal welfare shelter, which would be one of the best in the country. Now, how did we move that business proposition to a social proposition that we must look at creating an animal welfare shelter? Where did that come from? That came from our experience, that came from the fact that socially, as a responsible citizen, this is required for these poor animals. How do we help the migrant workers? So I think these are lessons of learnings and the way the leadership has empowered the teams to look at it. I think that's what I enjoy in this organization, because we are allowed to think differently.
Yeah, and I think I think putting aside business, kind of leading you to think about so many other things that are meaningful and important as well, right? And it's just about how, as business, will start thinking about all of this as we think of business as well. And I think that's going to be quite interesting. And truly, Roma, walking the talk, as we say it, right? I think you've just kind of cited so many examples of how you did that. Jay, do we have time?
Um, I think this conversation can go on and on, but,
Okay.
but I guess, yes, since we have more people, we've got to stop somewhere, and maybe we can have a separate
Done.
conversation
So,
one at a time.
So I'm glad I asked. So I think we'll end it there, Roma. We run out of time, but thank you so much, for sharing your experiences over the last 1 year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nandita. I think it was a pleasure being here. I know there were some few thoughts that I shared, and I'd love to talk to my own PR fraternity and possibly have a better opportunity to dialogue more. But thank you for this opportunity. ICC, once again, thank you for having me here. Anup, thank you for inviting me. And Nandita, you were wonderful as usual. And thank you again.
Thank
you. And we would definitely, as a chamber, want to be a part of the conversations as well. We are not really the PR part, but yes.